It was no very unusual thing for Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard to look in upon us of an evening, and his visits were welcome to Sherlock Holmes, for they enabled him to keep in touch with all that was going on at the police headquarters. In return for the news which Lestrade would bring, Holmes was always ready to listen with attention to the details of any case upon which the detective was engaged. On this particular evening, Lestrade had spoken of the weather in the newspapers. Then he had fallen silent, puffing thoughtfully at his cigar. Holmes looked keenly at him.
"Anything remarkable on hand?"
he asked.
"Oh, no, Mr. Holmes, nothing very particular."
"Then tell me about it."
Lestrade laughed.
"Well, Mr. Holmes, there is no use denying that there is something on my mind. And yet it is such an absurd business that I hesitated to bother you about it. On the other hand, although it is trivial, it is undoubtedly queer. You wouldn't think there was anyone living at this time of day who had such a hatred of Napoleon I that he would break any image of him that he could see."
Holmes sank back in his chair.
"That's no business of mine,"
said he.
"That's what I said. But then, when the man commits burglary in order to break images which are not his own, that brings it away from the doctor and on to the policeman."
Holmes sat up again.
"Burglary? This is more interesting. Let me hear the details."
"The first case reported was 4 days ago. It was at the shop of Morse Hudson, who has a place for the sale of pictures and statues in the Kennington Road. The assistant had left the front shop for an instant, when he heard a crash, and hurrying in he found a plaster bust of Napoleon lying shivered into fragments. The second case, however, was more serious and also more singular. It occurred only last night. In Kennington Road, there lives a well-known medical practitioner named Dr. Barnicot. This Dr. Barnicot is an enthusiastic admirer of Napoleon. Some little time ago, he purchased from Morse Hudson 2 duplicate plaster casts of the famous head of Napoleon by the French sculptor Devine. One of these he placed in his hall in the house at Kennington Road, and the other on the mantelpiece of the surgery at Lower Brixton. When Dr. Barnicot came down this morning, he was astonished to find that his house had been burgled during the night, but that nothing had been taken save the plaster head. It had been carried out and had been dashed savagely against the garden wall, under which its splintered fragments were discovered. But I have not got to the end yet. Dr. Barnicot was due at his surgery at 12 o'clock, and you can imagine his amazement when, on arriving there, he found that the window had been opened in the night, and that the broken pieces of his second bust were strewn all over the room. It had been smashed to atoms."
"They are singular, not to say grotesque,"
said Holmes.
"May I ask whether the 2 busts smashed in Dr. Barnicot's rooms were the exact duplicates of the one which was destroyed in Morse Hudson's shop?"
"They were taken from the same mold."
"Such a fact must tell against the theory that the man who breaks them is influenced by any general hatred of Napoleon."
The development for which my friend had asked came in a quicker and an infinitely more tragic form than he could have imagined. Holmes entered, a telegram in his hand. He read it aloud.
"Come instantly, 131 Pitt Street, Kensington. I don't know, maybe anything. But I suspect it is the sequel of the story of the statues. In that case, our friend the image breaker has begun operations in another quarter of London."
In half an hour we had reached Pitt Street. As we drove up, we found the railings in front of the house lined by a curious crowd.
"By George, it's attempted murder at the least. Nothing less will hold the London message, boy."
"It's the Napoleon bust business again,"
said Lestrade.
"You seemed interested last night, Mr. Holmes, so I thought perhaps you would be glad to be present, now that the affair has taken a very much graver turn."
"What has it turned to then?"
"To murder. Mr. Harker, will you tell these gentlemen exactly what has occurred?"
"It's an extraordinary thing,"
said he,
"that all my life I have been collecting other people's news, and now that a real piece of news has come my own way I am so confused and bothered that I can't put 2 words together. However, I've heard your name, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and if you'll only explain this queer business, I shall be paid for my trouble in telling you the story. It all seems to center round that bust of Napoleon which I bought for this very room about 4 months ago. I picked it up cheap from Harding Brothers, 2 doors from the High Street station. A great deal of my journalistic work is done at night, and I often write until the early morning. So it was today. I was sitting in my den, which is at the back of the top of the house, about 3 o'clock, when I was convinced that I heard some sounds downstairs. I listened, but they were not repeated, and I concluded that they came from outside. Then suddenly, about 5 minutes later, there came a most horrible yell. The most dreadful sound, Mr. Holmes, that ever I heard. It will ring in my ears as long as I live. I sat frozen with horror for a minute or two. Then I seized the poker and went downstairs. When I entered this room I found the window wide open, and I at once observed that the bust was gone. Why any burglar should take such a thing passes my understanding. You can see for yourself that anyone going out through that open window could reach the front doorstep by taking a long stride. Stepping out into the dark, I nearly fell over a dead man who was lying there. I ran back for a light, and there was the poor fellow. A great gash in his throat and the whole place swimming in blood. He lay on his back, his knees drawn up and his mouth horribly open. I shall see him in my dreams. I had just time to blow on my police whistle, and then I must have fainted.
Well, who was the murdered man?
Ask,
There's nothing to show who he was.
said Lestrade.
You shall see the body at the mortuary. He is a tall man, sunburned, very powerful, not more than 30. A horn-handled clasp knife was lying in a pool of blood beside him. There was no name on his clothing, and nothing in his pockets save an apple, some string, a shilling map of London, and a photograph. Here it is.
It represented an alert, sharp-featured simian man, with thick eyebrows and a very peculiar projection of the lower part of the face, like the muzzle of a baboon.
And what became of the bust?
We had news of it just before you came. It has been found in the front garden of an empty house in Campden House Road. It was broken into fragments. I am going round now to see it. Will you come?
Certainly. I must just take one look round.
He examined the carpet and the window.
The fellow had either very long legs or was a most active man,
said he.
With an area beneath, it was no mean feat to reach that window ledge.
The disconsolate journalist had seated himself at a writing table.
I must try and make something of it,
said he.
Though I have no doubt that the first editions of the evening papers are out already.
As we left the room we heard his pen traveling shrilly over the foolscap. The spot where the fragments of the bust had been found was only a few hundred yards away. For the first time our eyes rested upon this presentment of the great emperor. It lay scattered in splintered shards upon the grass. Holmes picked up several of them and examined them carefully. I was convinced, from his intent face and his purposeful manner, that at last he was upon a clue.
Well,
Ask,
We have a long way to go yet,
said he.
and yet, well, we have some suggestive facts to act upon. The possession of this trifling bust was worth more, in the eyes of this strange criminal, than a human life. Then there is the singular fact that he did not break it in the house, or immediately outside the house, if to break it was his sole object.
why did he not break it there? I give it up,
said Lestrade. Holmes pointed to the street lamp above our heads.
He could see what he was doing here, and he could not there.
By Jove, that's true. Now that I come to think of it, Dr. Barnicott's bust was broken not far from his red lamp. Well, Mr. Holmes, what are we to do with that fact?
To remember it, to docket it. What steps do you propose to take now, Lestrade?
The most practical way of getting at it, in my opinion, is to identify the dead man.
Oh, you must not let me influence you in any way. I suggest that you go on your line and I on mine. We can compare notes afterwards. Tell Mr. Harker for me that I have quite made up my mind, and that it is certain that a dangerous homicidal lunatic, with Napoleonic delusions, was in his house last night.
You don't seriously believe that? Holmes smiled.
Don't I? Well, perhaps I don't, but I am sure that it will interest Mr. Horace Harker and the subscribers of the Central Press Syndicate. Now, Watson, I think that we shall find that we have a long and rather complex day's work before us. I should be glad, Lestrade, if you could make it convenient to meet us at Baker Street at 6 o'clock this evening.
Sherlock Holmes and I walked together to the shop of Harding Brothers. A young assistant informed us that Mr. Harding would be absent until afternoon.
We must come back in the afternoon. Let us make for Mr. Morse Hudson, of the Kennington Road, and see if he can throw any light upon the problem.
A drive of an hour brought us to the picture dealer's establishment. He was a small, stout man with a red face and a peppery manner.
Yes, sir. On my very counter, sir. What we pay rates and taxes, for I don't know when any ruffian can come in and break one's goods. Do I know that photograph? Yes, I do. Why, it's Beppo. He was a kind of Italian piece workman who made himself useful in the shop. The fellow left me last week, and I've heard nothing of him since. He was gone 2 days before the bust was smashed.
We have this Beppo as a common factor, both in Kennington and in Kensington. Now, Watson, let us make for Gelder & Co. of Stepney the source and origin of the busts.
We came to a riverside city where the tenement houses swelter. Here we found the sculpture works. The manager, a big blonde German, received us civilly. A reference to his books showed that the 3 busts which had been sent to Morse Hudson had been half of a batch of 6, the other 3 being sent to Harding Brothers. But the production of the photograph had a remarkable effect upon the manager. His face flushed with anger, and his brows knotted over his blue Teutonic eyes.
Ah, the rascal! Beppo was his name. It was more than a year ago now. He knifed another Italian in the street, and then he came to the works with the police on his heels.
Could you give me the date when Beppo was arrested?
He was paid last on May 20th.
The afternoon was far advanced before we were able to snatch a hasty luncheon. Holmes read the newspaper while he ate.
The press, Watson, is a most valuable institution.
We will hark back to Kensington and see what the manager of Harding Brothers has to say. The founder proved to be a brisk, crisp little person.
One have the entries here, one to Mr. Harker, one to Mr. Josiah Brown of Chiswick, and one to Mr. Sandiford of Reading.
When we reached Baker Street, the detective was already there.
I have identified the dead man and found a cause for the crime. His name is Pietro Venucci, from Naples, and he is one of the greatest cut-throats in London. He is connected with the mafia. The other fellow is probably an Italian also. He has broken the rules. Pietro is set upon his track. Probably the photograph we found in his pocket is the man himself.
Excellent, Lestrade! But I didn't quite follow your explanation of the destruction of the busts.
The busts. You never can get those busts out of your head.
If you will come with me to Chiswick tonight, Lestrade, I'll promise to go to the Italian quarter with you tomorrow. In the meantime, Watson, I should be glad if you would ring for an express messenger, for I have a letter to send, and it is important that it should go at once.
Holmes spent the evening in rummaging among the files of the old daily papers. When at last he descended, it was with triumph in his eyes. I was not surprised when Holmes suggested that I should take my revolver with me. He had himself picked up the loaded hunting crop, which was his favorite weapon. A four-wheeler was at the door at 11. A short walk brought us to a secluded road. In the light of a street lamp we read, Laburnum Villa, upon the gate post. The occupants had evidently retired to rest. The wooden fence thrown a dense black shadow upon the inner side, and here it was that we crouched.
I fear that you'll have a long wait,
Holmes whispered.
It's a 2-to-1 chance that we get something to pay us for our trouble.
It proved, however, that our vigil was not to be so long. The garden gate swung open, and a lithe dark figure, as swift and active as an ape, rushed up the garden path. We saw the sudden flash of a dark lantern inside the room. What he sought was evidently not there, for again we saw the flash through another blind. But before we could move, the man had emerged again. As he came out into the glimmering patch of light, we saw that he carried something white under his arm. Turning his back upon us, he laid down his burden, and the next instant there was the sound of a sharp tap. The man was so intent upon what he was doing that he never heard our steps. With the bound of a tiger, Holmes was on his back, and an instant later Lestrade and I had him by either wrist, and the handcuffs had been fastened. As we turned him over, I saw a hideous, sallow face, with writhing, furious features, glaring up at us, and I knew that it was indeed the man of the photograph. But it was not our prisoner to whom Holmes was giving his attention. Squatted on the doorstep, he was engaged in most carefully examining that which the man had brought from the house. It was a bust of Napoleon broken into fragments. Carefully Holmes held each separate shard to the light, but in no way did it differ from any other shattered piece of plaster. The hall lights flew up, the door opened, and the owner of the house, a jovial, rotund figure in shirt and trousers, presented himself.
Mr. Josiah Brown, I suppose,
said Holmes.
Yes, sir, and you, no doubt, are Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I did exactly what you told me.
If you will come round once more to my rooms at 6 o'clock tomorrow, I think I shall be able to show you that even now you have not grasped the entire meaning of this business.
When we met again next evening, Lestrade was furnished with much information concerning our prisoner. His name, it appeared, was Beppo.
He has twice already been in jail. He could talk English perfectly well. His reasons for destroying the busts were still unknown, and he refused to answer any questions.
At last there was a ring at the bell. A minute later an elderly red-faced man with grizzled side whiskers was ushered in. In his right hand he carried an old-fashioned carpet bag.
Mr. Sandiford of Reading, I suppose?
Yes, sir. You wrote to me about a bust that is in my possession.
Exactly. I desire to possess a copy of Divine's Napoleon, and am prepared to pay you £10 for the one which is in your possession.
He opened his bag, and at last we saw placed upon our table a complete specimen of that bust which we had already seen more than once in fragments.
You will kindly sign that paper, Mr. Sandiford. Thank you, here is your money, and I wish you a very good evening.
Holmes began by laying a clean white cloth over the table. Then he placed his newly acquired bust in the center. Finally he picked up his hunting crop and struck Napoleon a sharp blow. The figure broke into fragments. Holmes bent eagerly over the shattered remains. Next instant, with a loud shout of triumph, he held up one splinter, in which a round, dark object was fixed.
Gentlemen, let me introduce you to the famous Black Pearl of the Borgias.
Lestrade and I sat silent for a moment, and then we both broke at clapping.
It is the most famous pearl now existing in the world. I have traced it from the Prince of Colonna's bedroom at the Dacre Hotel to the interior of this, the last of the 6 busts. Suspicion fell upon the maid of the princess, whose name was Lucretia Venucci, and there is no doubt in my mind that this Pietro who was murdered 2 nights ago was the brother. Beppo had the pearl in his possession. He was pursued by the police. He made for the factory, and he knew that he had only a few minutes in which to conceal this prize. 6 plaster casts of Napoleon were drying in the passage. One of them was still soft. In an instant Beppo made a small hole in the wet plaster, dropped in the pearl, and covered over the aperture. But Beppo was condemned to a year's imprisonment. He could not tell which contained his treasure. Only by breaking them could he see.
Well,
Sad.
I've seen you handle a good many cases, Mr. Holmes, but I don't know that I ever knew a more workmanlike one than that.
Thank you,
said Holmes.
Put the pearl in the safe, Watson, and get out the papers of the Conk Singleton forgery case. Goodbye, Lestrade. If any little problem comes your way, I shall be happy, if I can, to give you a hint or two as to its solution.